Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I'm, of course, your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. And what's on my mind today is, well, really, the goal of this podcast here, as with other podcasts that I do, other radio shows that I do, is I tried, it's important to me to get my audience to think critically about whatever it is, whatever information's being presented to them, especially in these times. As of recording right now, we are dealing with the coronavirus, COVID-19, around the world, and of course here in the United States. And if you turn on the TV, you are not going to get a whole lot of critical information. You are going to get a whole lot of sensationalized information. And it's important to understand what you're seeing and how to compartmentalize it and how to think critically on it and what it actually means, decipher it. And I'll give you an example here. No, this podcast is not going to be about coronavirus, but this is all in an effort to help you think more critically, because I think logic and critical thinking is a great way to ease fears. It's a great way to process the information thrown at you in your life rather than relying on sensationalism. As of recording today, there have been almost 26,000 deaths contributed to coronavirus here in the United States. They always throw the coronavirus as cause of death, even when it's a victim who was brought into the hospital for a stroke, or who recently had a stroke, or who had a heart attack, or had some horrible underlying condition. If they caught coronavirus on their last days, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back, on top of all the other medical issues, they will contribute their cause of death to coronavirus. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing, 26,000 deaths as of recording right now. The way they present that information on TV and other outlets is, just as I mentioned, they'll say, there have been 26,000 people that have died of the coronavirus in the United States. Big, giant numbers on your screen. They will keep reiterating 26,000 deaths, 26,000 deaths, 26,000 people have died. Almost, that's a medium-sized sports arena full of people that have died in the United States for coronavirus at this point. The reason why they use that 26,000 number, or they use that number, isn't because it's an absolute. I mean, it is an absolute, but it draws the most amount of sensationalism and fear out of you. And remember, I've said on this show many times before, the only reason why a news network like Fox or MSNBC or CNN does anything on TV, the reason why the network is there is not to bring you the news, it's to keep you paying attention so that you stick around and don't change the channels before they get to the commercials. They're going to say whatever they can say to you to keep you tuning in so that you can see the Tide commercial or the Toyota commercial coming up. If they give the information to you in a critical fashion using just logic and pure data, it's not sensational, it's boring. You're going to change the channel to the next thing with the explosions and the big numbers and the fear-mongering. That's just the way it works. So they'll use that number, 26,000, because it has way more of an impact, way more of an emotional impact than saying the numbers in a different way. For instance, I've got my calculator here. 26,000 people is 26,000 divided by the population of the United States, 330 million people. 26,000 divided by 330 million means that 0.00007% of people in the United States have died from the coronavirus. 0.00007%. Not 1%, not 2%, not 3% of the population. 0.00007% of the population has died from the coronavirus. Now, if they presented that, if the big number on the screen says out of 330 million people, 0.00007% people have died from coronavirus, that doesn't sound very scary. That is a truthful number, but it's presented in a way, it's the same number of people, but it's presented in a way that makes way less of an impact. Not many people would care if a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of people are dying from this disease. Saying the number 26,000 has way more of an impact, but it's all the same data. It's just how it's presented. The critical thinker, though, instead of freaking out and bathing in Purell and wiping their entire body down head to toe in hand sanitizer, will, of course, take precautions. You always take precautions. There's no sense in spreading whatever germs you have to another person. But if you're a germaphobe and you fear things like that, it's less of a hit when you say it's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. It's the same reason why people fear flying. You'll get in the car and you'll be comfortable in the car driving to the airport, and then you'll be freaked out getting on the airplane because you're afraid the plane is going to crash. The odds of the plane crashing are almost immeasurable. They're almost not measurable compared to the risk you took getting in the car driving a few miles to the airport. You were on an order of magnitude more likely to die on the way to the airport, just in that first mile away from your house. Statistically, you are way more likely to die than you are in a plane crash. The plane is the safest The plane is the safest thing you're going to do that day. Actually, flying in the plane statistically is the safest thing you will do in that whole day of traveling. That once the plane is in the air and flying, that's the safest place on Earth you can possibly be. But we are way more familiar with driving a car, even though it's more dangerous, and we're just more comfortable because it's familiar to us. So anyways, the picture I'm painting here is just thinking critically and thinking logically can ease fears, and most importantly, it can help you understand your world better. The meat and potatoes of this podcast is that I want to talk about renewable energy and energy storage, if I may. And I know I've talked about solar energy in the past. As you all well know, I am very interested in solar power. I have solar panels at my home. My home is not powered off of solar panels, but I have it as a backup power supply. Basically, all my lawn equipment is run off solar panels. My phones are all charged. Solar panels, tablets, everything. It's running off the solar panels. I have a 195 watt solar panel and a couple of batteries that I need to upgrade, but more on that later. I was on YouTube, as many of us are wont to do, and I'm always surprised when I go down this rabbit hole of renewable energy sources, the lack of critical thinking by a lot of people. I would wager that it's probably on the whole, the masses are generally ignorant about renewable energy, and I don't mean that as a slight, because I'm ignorant about a lot of renewable energy. I'm ignorant about a lot of energy storage and energy density and all that stuff. Even though I'm fascinated by it, because I am ignorant on it, and I know that I'm ignorant on it, so I want to keep learning more about it. But there's a lot of ignorance out there when it comes to renewable energy sources, and I'll use one comment I read, which was the catalyst for doing this entire podcast. It was a comment, you can tell the person perhaps didn't really think about what they were saying, didn't put a lot of thought into it before they said it. But what the person mentioned was, well, actually, I'll just read the comment in this person's own words. Quote, "This solar projects are destructive to nature," no capitalization. "They should be placed on houses, not to destroy the deserts." Unquote. So this is just an example of the mindset of someone who hasn't thought critically about the issue. going by this person's screen name, I won't say specifically what it is, but they sound like what I lovingly call on the show greenie weenies that are missing the forest for the trees, that are so preset and not hurting nature or anything like that, that they're not thinking clearly. They don't think clearly that anything you do, anything, any source of energy generation, energy storage, anything, renewables, everything has pros and cons. Everything. There is no such thing as a free lunch. You have to make sacrifices in one aspect to gain the benefits in another, and there's nothing out there. There's absolutely no source of renewable energy out there that doesn't have pros and cons. So, to break down this person's comment a little further, he says, quote, "This solar projects are destructive to nature. They should be placed on houses, not to destroy the deserts." So, one aspect of this mentality, this thought process, is accurate. Yes, if you put a solar farm out in the desert, it will have an impact on that local environment, on that local ecosystem. When you put a bunch of solar panels in the ground, it's going to create more shade in those few hundred acres wherever the solar panels are. The animals are going to have to get used to it, or it's going to displace some animals. The reflections off the solar panels can maybe disorient some birds flying above. There are some impacts. There are some cons to putting solar panels out in the desert. But his idea that you should only put them on the houses is flawed. And maybe I don't need to point out the flaw there, but I will anyways. Houses are not ideal. Most houses are not built in a way to capture as much sunlight as possible. A lot of houses are in valleys that are in the shade every day by 2 p.m. Someone's house who lives in a valley in the mountains is not going to see the sun at all past 2 p.m. Or maybe at all ever during the wintertime. The sun may be so low on the horizon that the house is in the shade all day long, not getting any sunlight. Other houses are in the forest and have lots of shade and lots of tree cover. You can't have solar panels efficiently on those houses as well. One of the most efficient ways to generate renewable energy, let's keep it with solar panels for the moment, but this also applies to hydroelectric dams and wind turbines. You can't put wind turbines and dams in everybody's backyard. You can't put solar panels on everybody's house. There has to be agreed upon areas out in nature to collect the source of renewable energy. So a dam has to be put in a river or anywhere there's flowing water. Wind has to be put where there's wind, usually out in the desert somewhere, some flat plain area, even up in the mountain. There's lots of places that get wind. Solar panels also. If you are selling the electricity to lots of houses that are in the shade or under the cover of lots of trees, or they don't get direct sunlight, you have to put the solar panels somewhere to collect that energy. So if you put a solar farm 100 miles away or 20 miles away from a community that is in the shade, and you put the solar panels where the light is, out in a field somewhere, that's just an efficient way to collect the energy to pipe to the homes. But that is right. There is a con there that, yes, wherever you put the solar farm, it's going to have the potential to displace and impact the local ecosystem in that immediate vicinity. There's a con to it. The pros are, here's the pros to solar specifically. Actually, we're going to go down the list just to let you know of the most popular forms of renewable energy. We're going to go over the pros and cons. And again, this is all in an effort to help you think critically about anything having to do with renewable energy and, as we'll get to, energy storage. There's nothing that is inherently better than anything else. I guess it all depends on how you market it. It all depends on the region. But the pros to solar panels in this case, the pros to putting it out in the desert is that now that house does not have to burn coal for its electricity. It does not have to burn oil for its electricity. Solar power generation is clean, it's abundant, and it doesn't create carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere. Yes, it can potentially displace a few lizards, although that also depends on how you look at it. If you throw a car overboard into the ocean, it quickly becomes a sanctuary for fish, becomes part of the coral, and it's a new ecosystem for fish to thrive in. And in many cases, if it's planned and done right and calculated right, sinking ships is done very methodically so that it creates a new habitat for fish to thrive. Sometimes endangered species of fish. It can help revive damaged fish populations, help bring them back. In the same way, solar panels theoretically could give some animals shelter and shade. But regardless, even if it's good for some animals, what's good for the spider isn't good for the snake or something like that? What's good for the cat isn't good for the mouse, so to speak. So yes, while there are if a lot of lizards need to be in the shade for some reason, then it's not good for any bugs around there who will be eaten if they go into the shade. You get what I'm saying? There's trade-offs, pros and cons. But again, the biggest con, or the biggest pro with solar is that it does not. You eliminate the carbon dioxide emissions, the greenhouse gases. That is a massive, huge con. Also, the sun doesn't turn off effectively. Yes, nighttime. That's a con. A con is that while you have this abundant source of energy that's going to last for billions of more years, you can't generate electricity at night. Some articles say you can't generate electricity when it's cloudy. Too many articles say this, and that is just patently and scientifically not true. Now, it is severely reduced, but solar panels still generate electricity even when it's overcast and cloudy. It's far less, obviously, electricity than when it's sunny, but it still generates electricity as long as the sun out, as long as there's ambient light touching the solar panels, it is generating electricity. I don't know the exact scale off the top of my head, but let's say you have a 100-watt solar panel. The sun is directly overhead. It's perfect conditions. That solar panel is generating 100 watts of electricity. Now a cloud goes in front of it. It's cloudy. Now the solar panel is only generating 10 watts, 15 watts, what have you. Every panel is different. Each technology of photovoltaic cell is different, but you are still generating electricity even in the shade, even in under overcast, cloudy days, you are still generating electricity. I wish people would get over that myth that solar panels can't generate electricity if it's cloudy. Yes, they can, and yes, they do. It's just science. It's not opinion. That is just how solar panels work. They generate electricity anytime there's ambient light. But the fact remains, at night, it's a con that you can't generate electricity at night with a solar panel. Now, yes, I've watched a YouTube video many years ago where somebody was trying to figure out how much electricity moonlight generated in their solar panels, and it was almost unusable. I think he was able to light up a tiny little light-emitting diode, a little LED, and that was it, from full moonlight with his particular solar panel. There's like 400 watts of solar panels that only generated enough electricity with moonlight, not even to light up a flashlight. But anyways, back to what we're talking about. Let's go over the other main sources of renewable energy, and there are many that we won't get to here, but I'm putting this into your brain so that when you hear about this new potential source of renewable energy, you think about the pros and cons, and you think critically, a mental exercise. What could a possible con to this renewable energy source be? So, for instance, let's go to wind. The pros with wind energy, harvesting through wind turbines and otherwise, is that it's clean, low maintenance, and relatively inexpensive. The cons are that there's no energy when the wind isn't blowing. Unlike solar panels, which still generate electricity even when it's cloudy, wind turbines can't generate electricity if the turbines aren't moving at all, if there's no wind. Another con, which I don't know if I really mark this as an actual con, but I guess, to some, depends who you are, it is. Some find them ugly. when they think windmills are an eyesore on the horizon or in your town. Windmills are also noisy. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. There's been an entire studies done on the psychological effects of that whoosh on human psychology, and that people in towns where windmills are installed were getting sick or having mental health issues or whatever. I can't verify any of that. I forget where I saw that. Netflix or something like that. It was very anti-windmill, anti-wind energy. But anyways, they are noisy. That is a fact. They are noisy. Whoosh, 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 whoosh are those giant blades. And it's also a fact that wind turbines interfere with wildlife. They interfere with birds. Birds can hit the blades. They say it causes problems with wildlife. Monarch butterflies, if they're using the Earth's magnetic field to migrate from Mexico to Canada and back and forth again, that the wind turbines throw them off. They're emitting EMF fields, and it throws off their internal compasses. And not just monarch butterflies, of other wildlife that have a sixth sense for the Earth's magnetic field, that these sources of electricity generation can throw them off. Another con is that wind turbines require a lot of land to build a wind farm. Even if you want to build one windmill in a town to run several houses or an entire neighborhood, that's pretty big. That is an eyesore, and you are going to be close enough to hear the whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And you're going to need to have a chunk of land around it, the perimeter, to keep people safe from it. So there's cons to it. Pros: clean, low maintenance, relatively inexpensive. Cons: nothing when the wind's not blowing. No energy when the wind's not blowing. Some find it ugly. It's noisy. Interferes with wildlife. Requires a lot of land to build a wind farm. So I'm not saying, I am personally not editorializing that wind energy is necessarily a bad thing. Just saying there are pros and cons to it. Biomass. So burning trees and other organic material to generate electricity, either through steam. I guess it would only be through steam. Heat your home, I guess, directly. You can use the heat from burning. Obviously, you have a wood burning stoves. But anyway, burning biomass to generate electricity in any way, shape, or form. Pros: it's abundant. There are an abundance of trees, and you can replant the trees you use to burn in these biomass electric generators. It's also cleaner to burn than coal and fossil fuels, etc. Still burning something, so it's still causing pollution. Here's the cons, obviously. Still causes air pollution. It can take up a lot of energy to produce. So growing trees and growing biomass requires maintenance and watering. You're going to have to do trade-offs with how much water you're using to grow your biomass for energy. It can also be seasonal. And as mentioned just a second ago, it competes with food production resources. Okay, so you're using the water that you would normally use on your farm to produce food, but now you have to water these trees, and you have to water your biomass fields that you're going to use to burn, that create pollution to generate electricity. Pros and cons, things to think about. The next thing is landfill gas. So landfills, especially if they're filled with lots of organic material like banana peels and eggs and poopy diapers and what have you, they produce a lot of gas. Methane gas, and it's this methane that you can harvest and use from landfills to generate electricity, to burn and generate electricity. The pros is it's an efficient use of waste. If you're going to throw away this organic waste anyways, might as well harness the gases it produces as it decomposes to generate electricity. It also reduces methane emissions because you're burning the methane to create the electricity. The cons are, so it's cleaner than coal, cleaner than oil. The cons is that, for one, using landfill gas requires lots of land for the landfills. The landfills also cause pollution. It can rain on a landfill and bring those pollutants down into the water supply. It can make the air stinky and polluted. And also, this is kind of a good thing in a way. Recycling will reduce the energy source. So if everybody is recycling, and it's a good thing that you don't need a landfill anymore because everything's being recycled, then you can't use the methane because it's not making any methane because the landfill doesn't exist. So pros and cons, things to think critically about. Hydroelectric, so dams. Pros, it's clean and readily available wherever there is flowing water. The cons are that hydroelectric dams cause massive interference with the local ecosystem. Not even local ecosystem. Ecosystems upriver and downriver from wherever they put the dam are going to be altered cataclysmically when you install a dam. Now, it depends who you ask. Some people don't care. Oh, the poor fishes. I don't care about the fishes. I need electricity. Let's put a dam here. Las Vegas, we need to light up Las Vegas. The Hoover Dam needs to go here. Who cares how it throws off wildlife and migration patterns of whatever fish? We need the electricity. So it doesn't create any emissions. It's far cleaner for the atmosphere, but dams do impact the local ecosystem up and down river. Pros and cons. We already talked about solar. So there are other sources of renewable energy that I haven't mentioned here, but this was just the gist to get you started kind of thinking critically about things. So I didn't mention things like geothermal, tidal, etc. Geothermal is using areas where the magma in the earth comes close enough to the surface to where the ground is heated. We have steam, makes natural steam that you can use to turn turbines and generate electricity. So Old Faithful in Yellowstone and natural springs where there's bodies of water that are naturally hot because the magma is so close to the Earth's crust that it's heating everything up. You can use that energy to create electricity. What type of impact on the local environment and ecosystem would that have? That is something for us to think about. Tidal energy generation, you put buoys out in the ocean. The ocean is constantly undulating and waves go up and down, and you use that energy to convert into electricity. It's pretty easy to think about cons with tidal energy generation because that would interfere with fish and marine life and potentially get things caught up in it and throw off migration patterns. And it's yet again mankind putting something else in the ocean. There are pros and cons to tidal as well. So in this last part of the podcast today, I want to talk about how all of this, everything that I mentioned here, solar, geothermal, hydroelectric, all of it relies on energy storage. Energy storage is still the biggest, if not equally as big, a piece of puzzle as it is to actually generate the electricity from a renewable source. I go back to solar panels because that is what I have the most experience with because I use my solar panels every single day. The issue is not just getting the solar panels. That's the easy part. That's the cheap part, really. That's one of the cheapest parts is getting the solar panels. Solar panels used to be far more expensive. They have dramatically come down in price since 2010. Dramatically. I got my 195 watt solar panel for $170. That's well below $1 per watt. $1 per watt was the holy grail for solar panels, and we have surpassed that. You can get 100 watt solar panels now for $75, $80. We are well below the $1 per watt. These are monocrystalline panels. These are good panels, well below $1 per watt. So generating the electricity isn't the problem. Me generating 195 watts at noon, whenever the sun is at the highest point perpendicular to the solar panel, that's not the issue. The issue is storing that electricity. It's always going to be storing that electricity. Yes, immediately you can use that electricity to, for instance, if I go outside on a sunny day and plug my iPad into my charge controller, I'm basically taking power straight off the panel right into the iPad. or straight off the panel right into my lawnmower's battery, straight off the panel right into my computer, straight off the panel right into my phone, whatever. Yes, if I'm plugging something in while the sun is out, I am taking power directly from the solar panel before the excess power gets stored in the battery. But energy storage is still the biggest piece of that puzzle and the most expensive part of that puzzle. I've been looking around for, as it stands right now, for the past over 100 years, a tried and true method of electrical storage has been the lead acid battery, the car battery. The battery that's in your car is lead acid. The battery in your backup power supply for your computer is lead acid, or some variant of it. It can be glass mat, it can be sealed, unsealed, it can be gel, whatever. It's based on battery acid, usually hydrochloric acid, between an anode and a cathode, and that generates electricity. That there's an electrolyte. The acid is the electrolyte, and the two anode and the cathodes are what make the battery. The technology is old and it's been around for a long time. Lithium is fairly recently getting to the point where you can put it in that 12-volt format. Deep cycle, I should be way more specific here. Deep cycle format. Your car battery is not known as deep cycle. Your car battery is only designed to put tons of electricity out for a second or two to crank over your engine. Deep cycle batteries are designed to not put as much energy out immediately, but over time. So a car battery is only designed to be discharged down to 90% capacity, maybe even as far as 80% capacity. That means equate that to like your telephone. Your smartphone. If you had to charge your phone every time the indicator showed 80%, that is what the type of lead acid battery is in your car. Deep cycle allows you to discharge all the way down to 50% or even lower. That's what's known as deep cycle. Now, lead acid, like I just mentioned, you can only go down to about 50% in a deep cycle lead acid battery. A deep cycle lead acid battery is what fishing boats use for the trolling motors. RVs use them to run microwaves and various things off of inverters. Deep cycle batteries are meant to have a draw on them, a current applied to them, being drawn from them for a long time. For 24 hours a day, you can be pulling current from a deep cycle battery. Theoretically, you can't do that with a car battery. It's not what it's designed for. Lithium is getting to the point now where it can be used in those 12 volt, 24 volt, 36 volt, 48 volt applications. So in my case, I would replace my 12 volt lead acid deep cycle batteries with lithium iron phosphate batteries. It's not lithium ion. It's not lithium polymer. It's lithium iron phosphate, which is a much safer form of energy storage than lithium ion. Throwing a lot of words around here, and I apologize, but the point I'm making here is that in the 12-volt deep cycle lithium-based application, whereas a 100 amp hour lead acid deep cycle battery would cost maybe $100, $120, $150, less than $200, a 100 amp hour deep cycle lithium iron phosphate battery costs, at lowest I've seen, $700. It costs 2 to 4 times as much, 3 to 4 times, at least 3 to 5 times as much, I would say, as lead acid batteries. However, the trade-off is that the lithium iron phosphate batteries will last years, if not decades, whereas lead acid, you will need to replace those every 2 to 3 years at best. Now, if you know how to condition your batteries, you know how to maintain your batteries like I do, battery acid is cheap. I keep some in the garage. I can top up the batteries as needed. I can do the maintenance myself and get a lot of longevity out of lead acid deep cycle batteries. But it's still inherently dangerous. I have burned clothes and burned my hands to prove it. You cannot, I don't think even the safest among us can ever use hydrochloric acid or sulfuric acid. As many precautions as you take, some of it will get on you and you'll know it after a few minutes. My elbow is freaking on fire. Oh, because I got a little drop of acid on me. A little droplet went up into the air and landed on my forearm. It's almost impossible to reasonably safely work with sulfuric acid. Lithium iron phosphate batteries, don't have to worry about any of that. So where you have to replace lead acid batteries every 2 to 3 years, you don't have to replace the lithium iron phosphate batteries, but once every 10 years, 15 years, possibly even 20 years. So in the long run, it's cheaper. But the current cost of entry is a lot more expensive. There's pros and cons. The biggest piece of the puzzle, again, for energy storage, renewable energy, however you're generating the electricity, but especially for renewables, because the wind isn't always blowing and the sun isn't always shining at nighttime, you need to have a way to store this. So energy density will always be the most critical part of this equation. Renewable energy, the future of renewable energy can only go as far as our storage, as the energy density of our electricity storage will allow it. It's always going to be hindered by that, but there's constant work going on in increasing energy density. I was thinking about this the other day watching Star Trek, where they have the phasers and their warp cores and everything, and one of the most far-fetched aspects of the show, or maybe I should say one of the most fascinating aspects of the show, is the phasers. They have phasers that can do incredible things, that can output tremendous, miraculous amounts of energy. They can cause rock slides, it can move rocks around, it can kill people with a phaser beam or stun them. It's a multi-use tool that outputs incredible amounts of energy, and it's something that's no bigger than your television remote control. It can literally move boulders or blow up boulders, gigantic boulders, but it's only as big as your remote control. So that amount of energy to blow up a boulder would have to come from an incredibly dense form of electrical storage of incredible energy density. It's one of my favorite parts of Star Trek, actually, is that, in the future, they figured out such an efficiently dense energy density, dilithium crystals, all the whole sort of thing to enable warp at over 9 times the speed of light, to beam people from the ship down to the surface of the planet, hundreds of kilometers away beneath them, and back and forth. They can transmit human being biological mass over electromagnetic energy. It's crazy, and you need incredibly dense energy sources to do that. And I mean, that's an understatement. But that's a critical component of the future, nonetheless, not just a Star Trek future. I don't know if we'll ever get to that point. One can only imagine. But energy density is the biggest part of this equation. No matter the pros and cons to however we generate the electricity, the storage of that electricity is always going to be the bottleneck, to put it in a PC building term. I mean, bottleneck isn't just a PC building term. It's almost like you buy a big, powerful graphics card for $1,000. You buy an RTX 2080 Ti. I don't know how much that costs. $1,200 now. I haven't looked, but it's around $1,000. And then you get a $60 Pentium processor. And you ask, is this a good build? Is this good for gaming? The graphics processor, you can generate all the frames in the known universe, frames per second with that graphics card, but you are severely limited by the output of the processor. That's the bottleneck. And it's the same way with renewable energy. You can put up a solar farm and generate 500 megawatts of electricity with a solar farm, but that does no good at night, because you need to figure out an economical solution to store 500 kilowatts of energy overnight, megawatts of energy overnight. Tesla is one of those companies making big strides here, but they still heavily rely on lithium. You know, they built the gigantic, 100 megawatt battery out there in Australia on a dare, pretty much, on a bet. Was it 100 megawatts? It was something around there. It's just a gigantic battery, effectively. So Tesla is one of these companies working on energy density, but they still heavily rely on lithium. Mining and refining lithium is still incredibly destructive to the environment. I think of that every time I see an electric car going down the road. I make no mistake that the source of that, of storage, the lithium storage there, it's hugely destructive to the local environment where it's mined. Lithium is not a clean energy source. It's not a source of energy. Lithium is not a clean method of storing energy. It's the best that we got now, and that's the whole point here, is that it's progress. I want an electric car for myself, not because I think I'm going to be doing something great for the environment right now. I have no disillusions about that. Producing electric cars is still incredibly destructive to the environment. But our renewable energy future is going to be on the back of fossil fuels at present. Companies like Shell invest billions upon billions of dollars into renewable energy research and energy density progress, ways of storing that electricity. Because big oil companies are not stupid. The writing on the wall is that renewable energy is the future. So if they want to have a company in 100 years, they need to be the company that is producing that renewable energy so that they can sell it to us. So Shell is not going to be Shell Oil Company in 100 years. It's just going to be Shell Renewables, whatever they're going to call it. Same for any company, ExxonMobil. It's the same thing. They cannot be viable as a company for the next 100 years if they aren't the ones funding renewable energy research. That's another point of critical thinking as well. And that's perhaps the last thing I wanted to mention, is this critical thinking where you have people saying, down with big oil. And I understand. I mean, I completely understand the sentiment. It's stupid. It's stupid that we're still burning oil to drive to and from work. All we're doing, 90% of our time in the car is just commuting back and forth to work. Who cares what's turning the wheels? Just get me to my job and back home. I don't care. I don't need to be driving a 300,000 horsepower car back and forth to work every day. I want a car like that. I will never give up the DeLorean. There will always be a place for muscle cars recreationally. Don't get me wrong there. But man, it's Monday morning and I'm late. Just get me to work. I don't care if it's electricity or fossil fuels or what it is. But it's silly that it is fossil fuels. I do care that it's fossil fuels because it's not very 2020. It's not very Star Trek to be running around burning gas. But that's what we got now, and that's fine. But the sentiment I'm getting at here is people complain so much about fossil fuels, and this idea, this naive thought that we should destroy big oil companies is completely, like I said, just naive. It's not thought through. It's not thinking critically. If you destroy oil companies, if you were to destroy Shell Oil Company tomorrow, you would set back renewable energy 100 years, if not more. Because Shell is one of the biggest investors in renewable energy. So like it or not, right now, the renewable energy future is ushered in on the back of our fossil fuel present. That's just the way it is. And wishing for the destruction of an oil company is severely short-sighted. Severely short-sighted. It would put human progress back a century, if not more. It's what we have right now. It is what is bankrolling renewable energy research. If you got rid of Shell Oil Company tomorrow, you could not have enough drum circles on the earth to fundraise renewable energy research the way that Shell can do. You just can't. You can beat on the drums and eat all the special brownies you want. It's not going to progress renewable energy research forward. That takes capital. That takes money. That takes the green. And if it's one thing oil companies have, it's money and the resources to fund renewable energy resources. So should we wean off of oil? Yes, absolutely. Should we protest oil companies and ask them to be closed tomorrow? No. Forgive me for saying this, but that is stupid. Stupid. Idiotic and moronic and short-sighted. But I respect the passion. Maybe that was kind of harsh. I do respect the passion and I do respect that yearning for making the earth a better place to live for our grandchildren. I do respect that fully. It's like, I respect the drive. I respect, put down the tambourine for a second so you can hear me. I respect your passion, but it is severely misguided in a lot of ways. Misguided and short-sighted. Keep that energy. Let's just focus it into something practical. Something that will actually work. Does hanging off a bridge in not in downtown Houston, does hanging off a bridge to protest? Greenpeace did that recently. I talked about that. What are you doing? What benefit? You stopped traffic for hours. All of those idling cars pumping so many millions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere versus just being on the road for 15 minutes and getting home. Now they're on the road for 4 hours. Good job, Greenpeace. Wonderful execution. That is the epitome of short-sightedness. We are going to shut down this bridge to protest global warming. You just caused global warming. They're not thinking critically. They're not thinking critically. There is no way that I even think critically about everything. We are all emotional creatures. I will be the first to admit that. Anybody who listens to Geek Therapy Radio knows I just did get fired up. We're all emotional creatures. But I think it's important that we recognize that. My favorite character on Star Trek, the characters have always been Spock and mostly Data. Data, more than Spock even, I would say, is trying to learn the human condition. He's always in this hunt to be human and learn what makes humans operate, and he wants emotions and he wants to feel what humans feel, and it gets him in a lot of trouble sometimes and ethical dilemmas. But he's purely logical. He can only be logical. He's an android. He's a computer. He cannot think in abstract emotional ways like I can and like you can and like humans do. There's pros and cons to that. We can feel love and we can feel adored. I can go home to my wife and she can wrap her arms around me and I almost want to cry because I feel so loved and worthy. On the flip side, we can freak out, get angry, be depressed, be suicidal even. So we can feel loved and worthy at our highest in the pinnacle of human emotion and feel suicidal at the lowest. Those are the pros and cons of having human emotions. But I just think it's important, and why Data is my favorite character is because it's a constant injection of logic. Data comes at it from logic first because it's binary. It's either yes or no. It's very rarely that there's a gray area when you're thinking things in logical manner. It's either a yes or no. What's the greater benefit? What outcome has the greater benefit? That's the outcome we're going to choose. That's the outcome that you should choose. That's a very Data way of looking at things. Should we kill these 2 children or these 10 adults? Data would probably say, kill the 2 children if it came down to it. That's cold-hearted logic. Nobody likes that. I don't like that. That's horrible to think about. No one should ever have to make that sort of decision. The cold logic says to do the terrible thing against our emotion. So it's a constant balance with humans of logic and emotion. So what I ask you and what I ask myself is to constantly keep tabs on that yin and yang, that balance between our logic and our emotions. Are we freaking out about coronavirus out of pure logic? Or are we honest with ourselves? Are we freaking out about coronavirus because of 60% emotion and 40% logic? Are we being too calm about coronavirus because we're thinking about it with 99% logic and 1% emotion? Should we be more emotional about it? Would having a good balance of emotion and logic be beneficial to the human experience? I've always stated, and I've always thought that the more a bit of information elicits an emotional response out of you or me, I can only use me as an example because I'm not you, but the more something elicits an emotional response out of me means that I need to take a step back and think about it. whoa, that made me react very strongly and emotionally. I need to think about this again. Just take a step back and think about it. Add a dash of logic. We live in a time where there is so much information presented to us emotionally, where the criteria for presenting information to you is put through the filter of what will get the biggest rise out of you. What will elicit the biggest emotional reaction from the audience? Just keep that in mind with everything you read, watch, or hear, even with my show, even when I get feisty. When I get feisty, that means perhaps that you should think about it a little bit more critically, perhaps even more critically than I am. Again, I'll be the first to admit, because I only know me. I only know how I react to things, that there are things that I can react to emotionally that are not logical, that need more logic. But in this world, this day and age, again, we are presented with things emotionally. We are not presented with things logically. We're just not. Logic is boring. Logic doesn't elicit emotion. Logic doesn't make us care enough to stay tuned. Logic is facts. Information is going to be presented in two ways. What's going to have the most impact on you, or it's going to be presented logically. It's going to be presented on what has the most impact on you. 26,000 people died of the coronavirus. 26,000 people so far have died of the coronavirus in the United States. Or 0.00007% of the population has died from coronavirus. That's a tiny, almost immeasurable number. It's not emotional. It's not scary. 26,000 people. That's what's the soccer stadium where the Dynamo play down here? That's BBVA Stadium. That's an MLS soccer stadium in Houston. They could be bigger elsewhere. I don't know. College football stadiums can seat 70,000 people, 90,000 people. It is not uncommon for soccer stadiums, football stadiums, sorry, if you're listening elsewhere in the world, to house almost 100,000 people, if not more than that. So let's say you have a quarter of the seats filled in a 100,000 seat soccer stadium. That's not as impressive to the TV cameras as if every seat was packed. Or really what they would do, okay, you have a 100,000 seat stadium, only 26,000 people bought tickets. They would put all of those people in the first bottom rows and tell the cameras, don't you dare zoom out enough to show the empty top rows. Don't do it. Don't show them that most of the stadium's empty. Be creative with the camera angles to always have a crowd in the background. Always. Political campaigns do this all the time. Political rallies always do this. Look how many people showed up to support this candidate. Oh my, there's people, it's packed, people everywhere. Well, what they do beforehand is tell people to pack in close together and then to keep the cameras on a tight shot so that it can't show all the empty space. That's just a common trick. Logic would be to pan out, show you, oh, there's not very many supporters here. Emotion says get in close to make it look like there's a lot. We're not lying to anybody. We're showing them the same amount of people. We're just doing it creatively. We're just presenting the information in a way that's more emotional, makes you think a certain way, encourages the brain to go go in a more sensational place. Wow, this candidate has so many supporters. Zooms out. It's an empty parking lot. There's 20 people, including the candidate. It's crazy. So any information being presented to you, think critically. Let's be a little bit more Data from Star Trek about things. But perhaps be a little bit more Captain Kirk as well. Emotional when we need to. Logically, our friend, hanging off a cliff it's not gonna change, our life, really. I mean, emotionally, it's gonna be devastating, of course. But him dying is not a direct threat to my well-being. That's not the kind of society we live in anymore. We're not a tribal society. We don't live in a community with a family of 20. We're not hunters and gatherers anymore. It's my friend dying logically is of no consequence. And actually, logically speaking, my friend dying would mean more food for me. That's logical. But that's also horrible. Emotion is going to play big time into that decision. I want to save my friend's life because I would rather be dead than him. I love my friend so much that I would rather take the pain versus the one you love taking that pain or being scared, even being scared. Don't even want the person I love to be scared. That's emotion. That's good. It's good to have a balance, and you can see why Data in Star Trek is constantly yearning to have that emotion to feel that way, the good with the bad, the ups with the downs, because we need it. We need the emotion to balance out the logical, just like we need the logical to balance out the emotion. Anyways, I'm doing long podcasts now because I'm not putting a whole ton out, and I'm doing it anytime that I have time, anytime something is sparking my fancy. So, anyways, I'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio podcast. If you like the podcast, I would appreciate if you'd share it with your friends. That would be awesome. Patreon information is below, which is on my website, geektherapyradio.com. If you have any questions or comments about any of this, I'd love getting involved with my audience. So please email me if you have any thoughts on this at all. geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. It's a link right there in the podcast description as well. Of course, all the social media, Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. I uploaded the microcassette video on YouTube. I mixed an entire song with microcassette. It's fascinating. I just ordered a couple of Palm Pilots. That's the thing about Geek Therapy Radio is you'll hear me say things just out of left. There's so many left fields on Geek Therapy Radio. Hey, I just did a thing with microcassette. Here's a whole thing about logic. Let's talk about renewable energy, energy density. Oh, I ordered some Palm Pilots because I want to work on a Palm Pilot video. Also, they're really cheap right now. I was going to recommend that. If you're looking for a bit of retro tech that's not too retro, but still pretty retro, over 20 years old at this point, Palm Pilots are pretty cheap. And I would imagine like any bit of retro tech, they're going to get more expensive as time goes on. More and more people are going to remember those Palm Pilots? I want a Palm Pilot. And then they're all going to go to eBay and get a Palm Pilot. So what was once $10 to $25 is going to be $100 soon. I had a Pocket PC, a Compaq iPac, RIP Compaq, but at a Compaq iPac, it was Windows CE powered. It was before smartphones, right before smartphones came along, actually, early 2000s-ish. I don't know if I still have it. I pray that I can still find it in a box somewhere. But I went onto eBay to look for it. iPac 3150, I think. Compaq iPac 3150, H3150, whatever. I was like, okay, if it's on eBay, $5, $10, $50. There's no way this thing is more than $20. It's $200 now. $200 for my old piece of. It's not a piece of crap. It was really cool. I liked it. I just, thought there's no possible use for this anymore, so I forgot about it. And maybe I still don't have it, but I would have certainly never thought it would be worth $200 again. I didn't even pay $200 for it when it first came out. I would imagine at some point, Palm Pilots will follow the same route. Now, I cannot conceive of a world where Palm Pilots go for more than $100 used and scratched up. But then again, I couldn't conceive of a world where the same couldn't be said for a Commodore 64 or an NES. Old retro video games. How many people thought that retro video games would appreciate so much? There's old piece of crap cars you think no one would care about. All of a sudden, they're worth $12,000. Almost bought a Karmann Ghia several years ago, a Volkswagen Karmann Ghia, baby blue. It's still a bucket list car. It was gorgeous. I almost bought one. I think it was $4,000, and it was in good condition, great condition. $4,000 for a Volkswagen Karmann Ghia. Do you know how much those things are worth now, just a few years later? $12,000, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. At least, at bare minimum, at least 3 times as much as when I was first looking at a Karmann Ghia. Same thing with old Volkswagen Beetles. You used to be able to pick up an old Volkswagen Beetle for a few $100s. I kid you not, a few $100s you can get a Volkswagen Beetle. You could go on Craigslist, get a great running Volkswagen Beetle, 1972, whatever Volkswagen Beetle for $1,200. Nope, not anymore. $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. And even that's pretty reasonable considering the way classic cars are going. But do you think you would have asked somebody in 1985 what they think Volkswagen Beetles would be worth in the year 2020, even a piece of crap? If you told them $5,000, they would have crapped their pants. Absolutely puked their pants, as Dwight Schrute would say. They wouldn't. Inflation, for one thing, but also just the sheer price. I'd even adjusted for inflation. Like, who wants this piece of crap? This car is horrible to drive. I'm only driving the Beetle because I have to drive the Beetle. Yeah, well, there will come a day that people will pay top dollar to relive that misery. I want another Beetle. It's easy. I want another Beetle. That's an understatement. I've had 2 Beetles. Once you pop, you can't stop. I said I was wrapping up Geek Therapy Radio this week. Thank you for listening. Know that you are worthy of love, both giving and receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-confidence, your own self-worth. You are worthy of it all. Please understand that. Please let those words rattle around in your brain. Please. And that's it for me. Are you enjoying these longer format podcasts? I don't know if every podcast is going to be this long, but just let me know. Emails below. Take care, and I'll talk to you in the next one.